So James is asking, what is your take on Maajid Nawaz and his attitudes and positions to Islam at the moment? Is the winding up of the Quilliam Institute or the Quilliam Foundation the end of the most prominent Islamic reformist movement? My God, Armin, you're gonna love this. And what might be the perception of of, what might be the perceptions of Islamists and ramifications for liberal Muslims? Best, James McCaffrey. Thank you, James, for that question. And well, what is our take on Maajid Nawaz and his attitudes, positions to Islam at the moment? And what do you think the most prominent Islamic reformist movement? So can I give some background on this, because Armin's going to basically answer this question, I think, and he should. But when did we do that Niagara Falls thing? Remember when we did was that the non-conference?
Oh yeah,
2016 or something like that. 2017.
I think so. Yeah,
or maybe
I don't know.
Yeah, so a few years ago, me and Armin and Maajid were all at the same conference, and we spoke, and Maajid had come up and he was making his case for reform, and Armin went up and made his case against reform, and it was beautiful. And then after that, we had a panel discussion where it was the three of us, and it was Raheel Raza, right? It was also part of the reform movement, and we had a fascinating discussion. So I think that there's a lot of history there and a lot of views. So Armin, go ahead. What do you think? How did things turn out eventually?
Well, I mean, do you want me to like dance on the grave of Islamic movement and piss on it, and then
the reform movement?
Yeah, of the reform movement.
Yeah.
I mean,
you've been digging the grave for a long time now. You might as well dance on it.
Yes, and piss on it at the same time. Yeah, I would definitely like to do that. Yes, this is great. I told you this will fail, and it did. However, we can't. We have to know that this is not something that will go away. Okay, like if you think that this was a thing that now just got defeated, and now it's done, you don't know your Islamic history. You don't even know you don't know how the history of religion, right? This modern Islamic reform movement has been one of many attempts when Islam has been challenged, or any other religion, right? When you have a religion that is, there are certain norms and traditions and understanding and interpretation of how things are supposed to be. Society evolves and moves on. There's always not always, there's often two different reactions to it, and it creates two movements. One that wants to become more fundamental and more literalist, and the other one that wants to be more pragmatic and act like the religion itself is in line with the new understanding of how things are. Okay, and this fork has happened many times before with Judaism, with Christianity, with Islam, and even with Hinduism, as me and Susanna are recently learning about. So the problem with the fundamentalist fork, the direction and reaction, is that it's usually very aggressive and very harmful and tries to hold society back. The problem with the pragmatic reform movement, so if you think about Islam, the fundamental reform movement would be something like Wahhabism, and the pragmatic reform movement would be something like Maajid, Nawaz, and Quilliam. The problem with that is that society, the pragmatic one is more successful at holding society back, because the nature of religion as a whole is to just drag society down and not let things move forward, right? The fundamentalist one actually to some extent helps society move forward faster, because of how damaging and damning it is to society. People would be more encouraged to let religion go. Like, for example, look at how many people became ex-Muslims as a reaction to seeing ISIS, for example, right? But the pragmatic one holds society back because it tries to keep religion relevant, superstition relevant, nonsense relevant, faith relevant. So it's very damaging in that aspect of it. And that's why we attack it, and we try to not let these reform movements work. So what I'm saying is that this is such a fundamental part of how religion responds to threats, that you can't just think like, okay, the Quilliam failed, Maajid Nawaz failed, so we're good now. No, I mean, I'm pretty sure there's going to be many other similar reactions coming from what me and what we have been noticing is that the more clever reform attempts, because Majid Nawaz's attempt at reform was so moronic, okay, like it wasn't even intended to towards Muslims who were fundamentalists, right? It was directed towards Westerners, as a way to suggest maybe Islam is okay, right? If for a reform movement to be successful, it has to have an audience of fundamentalist Muslims who are considering to become less fundamentalist because of it. That wasn't even the target audience for Majid Nawaz's reform movement, right? So the more clever, Susanna, help me out with some names here because I'm not good with remembering names. I mean, Yasser Ghadi is the one that we all know. Like the more clever reform movements are the speakers or preachers or scholars who come from the fundamentalist side, um, from a scholarly perspective, and they are trusted within more mainstream Muslims as yes, thank you, Susanna, in the live chat. She's referring to Shabar Ali. So Yasser Ghadi and Shabar Ali, these are people who look fundamentalists, sound fundamentalists, have the credentials of scholars of fundamentalists, and people and mainstream Muslims don't trust Majid Nawaz. But Yasser Ghadi and Shabir Ali, these are people with mainstream Muslim audience, and they are a lot more clever in such coming up with ways to make Islam move on to the 21st century without acting like they're reforming anything. So the main failure of Majid Nawaz is that, oh yeah, we're reforming Islam, and Muslims are like, this doesn't need reform. This is the religion of God. Do you want to reform God's words like this? Like that's the most, if you understand anything about Islam, you know that is the most obviously wrong way of going about it. Like even if you look at historically reform movements, the people themselves didn't call it reform. Like other people call it reform, because it's nobody who wants to reform Islam, if they want to successful, will act like they're reforming Islam. They will act like this was always like this, right? Always, this is you're bringing Islam back to what it was supposed to be. Okay. So yeah, obviously Majid's attempt was a failure, but we have to be now more worried about a lot more clever, a lot more successful ways of reforming, and we have to call it out, and we have to call it a reform because they don't call it a reform, and show what they're actually doing. And these two people are the more important, Yasser Ghadi and Shabir Ali. But yeah.
And now, yeah. So I want to say one more thing. Like, aside from everything that you're saying, is that you're absolutely right when it comes to credibility. One of the biggest issues I had with this reform movement was happening with Maajid and the rest of the crew, and then these guys, a lot of these guys are friends, so we do like them personally, but was that it was geared towards an audience that was primarily Western. So they were kind of preaching to the crowd in a way. They wanted to speak to liberals in the West. They wanted to speak to like all kinds, but they weren't really getting a lot of traction, as Armin said, in the Muslim crowd. Who has been successful at that? Like the ex-Muslim movement. So now if you see some of this new generation of like some of the most prominent sort of ex-Muslim activists and YouTubers, Abdullah Samir kind of came from that society, right? You've got like Apostate Prophet. You've got this guy, Abdullah Gondal. You've got Haris Sultan. I mean, these are people who are actually engaging. They're engaging with very prominent sort of the people who are popular, at least on the popular stage. And they're having conversations with people in the Muslim community. They're bringing them into the fold. They're bringing them into the conversation, and they're bringing more credibility to it. So, Armin said, right from the beginning that this reform thing isn't going to work. The ex-Muslim thing is much more likely to work because it's just more honest. And that's true. And people who are from the other side, the super religious type Muslims, they respect the honesty. They respect it enough to want to debate it, and the reform thing just doesn't have that kind of heft.
One thing I was wrong about, that I'm happy that I was wrong about, is that I agreed with them that the ex-Muslim movement is not going to have the mass numbers that people think. Like we're not going to see like a half of an entire Islamic country leave Islam, right? But what I would say, like, as much as that's not going to happen anytime soon, it's going to be a lot more successful than the reform movement. And the reform movement shouldn't even be successful because that's how you keep religion alive, right?
Yeah.
The thing I was wrong about is that no, apparently half of an entire Islamic country did leave Islam. All right.
Most of it, right? Like Iran.
Yeah, that's so.
Iran is a
within
Muslim
one
minority country. Yeah, that's true.
yeah, within one generation, like show, like so. If anything, I was being optimistic about the ex-Muslim movement, and I was like, the reform movement is like holding us back. If anything, I wasn't optimistic enough. Like I was like, people thought I'm exaggerating the numbers. Apparently, no, I'm actually sure.
Yeah.
And actually, the interesting thing is that in a country like Iran, for example, the whole suggestion of reforming Islam is actually a taboo. It's a dirty word, right? Like even discussing reform, you would like people who are ex-Muslims, people who have left Islam, if you were like, hey, can maybe we should reform Islam, they would like, it's kind of like blasphemy in Iran among ex-Muslims and atheists. Like you would be the one thing, for example, I was telling the Persian audience on an Atheist Republic's Persian show was that I had a discussion with Sam Harris and I had some disagreements with him, right? On the show, right? On Secular Jihadists, right? And people in the live chat were laughing at me and making fun of me. And they was like, Armin, who the hell do you think you are to have a disagreement with Sam Harris? Like, how arrogant do you have to be for you to have Sam Harris on and have a disagreement with him? Like, how arrogant, right? And then I told them, well, let me tell you, because I knew if I tell them, they would be like, oh, crap, right? Because I knew my audience. This is a Persian atheist community. Well, let me tell you what the disagreement was, and you guys could tell me which side you're on. The disagreement was Sam Harris was on the side of reforming Islam, and I was against it. And then I started laughing at the audience because tell me, like, which side are you guys on, huh? Like people, because people in the live chat were like, oh my God, because they hate anybody suggesting that Islam could be reformed. So I was laughing at them for suggesting that I was on the wrong side because it's so, and it was so predictable that they would be against the Islamic reform. Anyways, Ali, do you want to add anything before we?
No, I think that's it. And there's I guess I'll just add, we have to mention that, and we're not going to get into too much detail because we can't talk about it here on YouTube, but Maajid has gone in a different sort of direction. I think many of you are familiar with it. So, I mean, that's something I can't really relate to. I think it's strange. I think that even Sam has misgivings about, just wondering what happened there. I'm not sure what's going on, but let's see. Hopefully, maybe we can talk to him again soon. See where his mind's at.
He won't. He's a coward.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hey guys, if you want to join these streams live, get your comments and questions read by Ali and Armin and the guests, and most importantly, to get full access to the full video versions of all these episodes, become a patron. Link in the description below.